It's not a lie. Russian grammar unfortunately is complicated. There are so many rules to remember and so many confusing exceptions. The structure is probably very different from your native language. What are we supposed to do with Russian grammar? Hi, I'm Denis, co-founder of Learning to Know Russian. Welcome. Thank you for turning to our experience and joining us. Russian students often speak very slowly. They use lots of pauses so they can think about each grammar rule before saying something. Even then, lots of students still make mistakes. It's frustrating. Usually the response is, I have to study more Russian grammar. I don't know enough rules. I always forget something. For the rest of the lesson, I want you to pay attention to these three words. Study, know, forget. This all reminds me of math class. First we study a theorem, then we have to know the formula. Finally, we may sometimes forget the formula and make mistakes. When we study a language, we try to memorize grammar formulas and use them in conversations. It's basically impossible, given how little time there is to respond during a normal conversation with a native speaker. I'd like to introduce another approach to learning Russian grammar. Forget about the mathematical approach. Once, after one of my talks, a man came up to me and said to me in good but very slow Russian, Denis, I really like your ideas about grammar, but I don't think they are very practical. How am I going to talk in Russian if I don't know all of the grammar rules? I told him, Greg, say something to me in your native language, anything at all. He said something like, if it doesn't rain, I'll go for a walk. Now, Greg, list all of the grammar rules that you follow it when you said the sentence. Oh, I don't know. Very few native speakers know their own grammar rules. The only reason he was able to speak fluently was that he knew the right language construction. He knew the right pattern and he was skilled in using it. A little while later, Greg decided to pause his Russian grammar studies for 3 months. Not surprisingly, he started to speak more quickly and Russian became easier for him. The most important thing for Greg was that he started to enjoy learning Russian. Now, it's time to introduce 3 especially complicated, unpleasant parts of Russian grammar. The first part is cases. Cases are extra difficult for students who don't have cases in their native language. It's very difficult to decide which case to use in the middle of the conversation. Here's an example, the word mama. If she is not there, we say нет мамы. If you are calling for mom, you зовете маму. If you miss mom, you are thinking о маме. It's amazing that a 4-year-old child can do something like that without even thinking. The second complicated part is verb aspects. For example, you use говорить to speak when you are speaking right now or when you speak on a regular basis, but you use сказать when you are talking about something that you said or will say once. Of course, each verb has its own set of forms. Verbs with prefixes, especially verbs of motion, are the third complicated part. Here's an example, ходить. It seems like a simple verb, but look at how many different prefixes can be used with this one verb. Входить, выходить, всходить, доходить, заходить, переходить, подходить, приходить, проходить, and so on. Many of these forms also have several meanings. which makes it even more complicated. English phrasal verbs such as break down, get up are kind of similar to Russian's verb with prefixes. You simply can't fix your grammar problem by using never-ending list of rules. Grammar is too complicated and our brains are not able to process all of the rules. Yes, grammar rules might be helpful when you are writing something, when you have time to think and fix mistakes. When you talk with someone, everything happens much more quickly. There is no time to ask yourself, what case should the word библиотека be in when you want to ask как пройти в библиотеку. But don't worry, let me break down my solution into two parts. First, exposure. You need to be exposed to proper grammar, written and spoken, as much as possible. Absorb the language. Second, language constructions. I mean groups of words and phrases that you can use in conversation. Almost everything we say is made of language constructions, even if we don't realize it. So we need lots of exposure, and we need to learn language constructions, patterns. How can we do this most effectively? If we just listen or read passively, we will make very slow progress. There is always a way to use our time more wisely and intensify our studies. Let me give you an example of what I mean. Listen to this short story by Tolstoy, The Three Bears. Одна девочка ушла из дома в лес. В лесу она заблудилась и стала искать дорогу домой. Да не нашла. That's enough for now. It's only an example. We could read this story, we could listen to it, we could even find the meanings of all the words we don't know. And it would be pretty helpful. But why not try to tell the story in first person? In other words, I'll tell the story as if I was the main character, not the girl. Я ушел из дома в лес. В лесу я заблудился и стал искать дорогу домой. Да не нашел. Now, I'll pretend that I'm talking about this event in the future. Imagine that this is what I'm going to do next weekend. Я уйду из дома в лес. В лесу я заблужусь и стану искать дорогу домой. Да не найду. What if you need to give someone instructions? Let's say you are talking to your colleague. We'll use the formal you. Уйдите из дома в лес. В лесу заблудитесь и станьте искать дорогу домой. You can call this type of exercise whatever you like. Time traveling, point of view, variations. Pick any name. But do you like it better than memorizing boring grammar rules all day long? The best part, of course, is that it's much more effective than the traditional methods for learning grammar. So, is it okay to use a grammar textbook? Or should we just throw it away? You might think that I am telling you that grammar is completely evil. Dennis thinks that if we could just get rid of grammar, then everything would be okay. That's not what I'm saying at all. The problem is that grammar textbooks can be very dangerous. If you don't know what you are doing, they can create more problems than they solve. Here's what I suggest. If a certain part of grammar doesn't mean anything to you, then it's too early to read about it in a textbook. For example, perhaps you see a chapter called Reflexive Verbs. If you can't give at least a few examples, or don't know where and why reflexive verbs are used, then the theory in a textbook won't help you. It's just going to confuse you even more, slow you down and make things more complicated. Here's an easy rule to remember. Language comes first, then grammar. What have we learned in our conversation? A mathematical approach to a language doesn't work. You can't solve language equations in your head during a conversation in Russian. The more grammar rules you know and try to use, the slower you will talk. There is another approach to Russian grammar. It has two parts: exposure to the language and language constructions. And finally, introducing grammar variations to small portions of text is much more effective than a passive approach. Here's your assignment. I bet you have a grammar textbook, maybe even a couple. Here's my proposal. Let's declare a moratorium, a ban on using your grammar books starting today. Stop studying grammar with the help of a textbook for, let's say, 3 months. Be decisive. Take some radical steps. Go grab your textbook right now and slap a sticker on it that says, "Don't open until date." For now, you're going to use the approach that I described. I'm absolutely convinced that after 3 months, you will not regret your decision. You'll realize just how much easier it is to use a natural approach. Thank you. See you next time.